The 6:47 a.m. light was just beginning to filter through the palms of Miami's exclusive Indian Creek Island when the unmarked SUVs pulled up to the gated compound. For the operatives who stepped out, the address required no navigation. It was the residence of the daughter of a president, a former White House advisor, and a woman who had spent her entire life navigating the intersection of American power and privilege. The agents were not there to deliver a summons or a polite request from a congressional committee. According to sources familiar with the operation, they were executing a federal court order, one that mandated the immediate surrender of travel documents belonging to Ivanka Trump. Within minutes, her passport was in their possession, a dramatic escalation in a legal war that had, until that moment, remained largely beneath the surface of public consciousness. The silence that followed the departure of the federal marshals was, by all accounts, deafening. For Ivanka Trump, the confiscation of her passport was not merely an administrative inconvenience, it was a physical barricade erected by the justice system, a signal that her freedom of movement was now subordinate to the gravity of the evidence accumulating against her and those closest to her. Sources close to the family describe a scene of immediate chaotic panic. Calls were placed not to lawyers first, but to the one man who had built a career on fighting the system itself, her father, former President Donald Trump. The news, delivered in those frantic early morning hours, would trigger a response from the 45th and 47th president that was as swift as it was predictable, a full-throated, bare-knuckled counterattack against what he would later decry as the weaponization of the judicial apparatus. To understand the seismic nature of this moment, one must look back at the decade-long shadow that has followed the Trump family through the corridors of power. This is not a single scandal with a neat beginning and end, but a sprawling web of investigations that have slowly tightened around the family business. The origins of the current crisis can be traced to the 2017 presidential inauguration, a lavish celebration of power that prosecutors in Washington, D.C. have long alleged was used as a personal piggy bank. The core allegation has always been one of systemic overpayment for event space at the Trump International Hotel, a scheme designed to funnel millions of dollars from the nonprofit inaugural committee directly into the family's commercial empire. For years, investigators have pieced together emails and testimonies, building a case that the first family blurred the lines between civic duty and personal enrichment with impunity. Central to that investigation has been Ivanka Trump herself. Court documents and witness testimonies have placed her at the heart of the negotiations regarding the hotel fees. An email she sent in December 2016, just weeks after her father's shocking election victory, has become a key piece of evidence. In it, she instructs the hotel management to charge the inaugural committee a fair market price. But investigators have long argued that the final price agreed upon, $175,000 for 4 days of space, was wildly inflated, nearly double what the market would have demanded. While Ivanka has maintained that her directive was ethical and above board, prosecutors see it as a carefully worded instruction that provided cover for the overpayment scheme, a document that raises more questions than it answers. The legal pressure, however, was never confined to the inaugural committee. Simultaneously, the New York Attorney General's office, under Letitia James, was conducting a parallel, long-running civil investigation into the Trump Organization's financial practices. The allegation there was one of systemic fraud, the intentional manipulation of asset valuations to secure favorable loans and tax benefits. For months, Donald Trump, Ivanka, and her brother Donald Trump Jr. fought a bitter legal battle to avoid testifying, citing the same political motivations their father has always claimed. But in a stinging rebuke from the bench, Judge Arthur Engoron saw through the delaying tactics, ordering the family to sit for depositions and dismissing their arguments as reminiscent of the fictional worlds of Lewis Carroll and George Orwell. That New York investigation eventually led to a landmark civil fraud ruling against the former president, but the criminal exposure for the family members never fully receded. The recent action in Miami, the passport seizure, suggests that federal prosecutors have moved beyond the civil context and into a criminal phase that directly targets Ivanka. Sources familiar with the sealed indictment, which remains under a strict gag order, indicate that the shocking evidence mentioned by court insiders relates to financial wire transfers and the use of shell companies. The transactions, allegedly traced through multiple jurisdictions, are said to amount to sums that investigators believe cannot be explained by legitimate business alone, forcing the judge's hand to impose travel restrictions to ensure the defendant remains within the court's jurisdiction. The response from Mar-a-Lago was immediate and volcanic. Donald Trump, never one to absorb a blow quietly, reportedly convened an emergency meeting of his legal and political advisors within hours of hearing the news. The strategy, as it has always been, is to fight on two fronts, the legal and the public. Through a series of statements and leaks to sympathetic media outlets, the former president's team has framed the passport seizure not as a routine judicial precaution, but as a politically motivated act of persecution. They argue that the judge, whose identity remains protected due to threats, is a pawn in a deep state plot to destroy his family ahead of a potential future political comeback. This narrative, repeated endlessly on social media, is designed to erode public trust in the very institutions now bearing down on his daughter. For Ivanka, the situation presents an impossible personal calculus. Having officially stepped away from politics to focus on her family and private life, she had carefully curated an image of detachment from the chaos of her father's political world. The current legal onslaught shatters that carefully constructed distance. The woman who once sat in the West Wing as a trusted advisor is now, according to court records, facing restrictions typically reserved for flight risks. The emotional toll, described by confidants as devastating, is compounded by the fact that the evidence against her is said to include communications with her brother and father, placing her in the unenviable position of being a potential witness against her own bloodline to save herself. Complicating the narrative further is the shadowy context of the wider investigation, which insiders suggest touches upon intelligence matters far beyond simple financial fraud. The recent massive release of documents related to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has injected a new, highly toxic element into the public perception of the Trump family's legal troubles. Within those millions of pages, a 2020 FBI memorandum has emerged containing explosive claims from a confidential informant. The memo alleges that Donald Trump was compromised by foreign intelligence interests and that Ivanka's position within the family dynamic was exploited as a form of collateral, a hostage to ensure the compliance of those around her. While unverified and vigorously denied by the White House, these claims have created a poisonous atmosphere in which any financial irregularity is viewed through a lens of potential national security breaches. The international dimension of the case adds another layer of complexity that investigators are now reportedly scrutinizing. Just weeks before the Miami raid, Ivanka Trump was photographed in Albania, touring coastal sites with architects and businessmen. The visit, ostensibly to scope a potential luxury resort development with her husband, Jared Kushner, immediately ignited local controversies regarding land ownership and environmental protection. For investigators, such international travel and the complex web of offshore financing required for such projects raise red flags. If the new evidence pertains to foreign financial entanglements, the Albanian visit, far from being a simple business trip, could be seen by prosecutors as a pattern of seeking assets and influence beyond the reach of U.S. law, a hypothesis that would justify the extreme step of grounding her. Legal analysts watching the case unfold are unanimous in their assessment that the judge's decision to move with such fast and decisive action indicates a level of evidentiary proof that is unusually high for this stage of a proceeding. Judges do not typically authorize the seizure of passports and the imposition of strict bond conditions without being presented with a compelling argument that the defendant poses a specific risk of flight or obstruction. The fact that this order was signed against Ivanka Trump, a mother of three with deep community ties and no previous criminal record, suggests that prosecutors have uncovered details about hidden assets, foreign property holdings, or communications regarding an intent to leave the jurisdiction that have not yet been made public. For the former president, the attack on Ivanka is perceived as the ultimate red line. Throughout his political career, he has weathered scandals that would have destroyed other politicians, often by projecting an image of invincibility. But his children, particularly Ivanka, have always been presented as the human face of the Trump brand, successful, polished, and above the fray. Watching her being treated as a common flight risk by federal law enforcement is a political and personal humiliation that he cannot tolerate. His fight back, therefore, is not merely a legal strategy. It is a primal reaction designed to delegitimize the process entirely, to make the cost of prosecuting his family so high in political capital that the Justice Department will ultimately blink. The political ramifications extend deep into the current presidential term. As Donald Trump navigates his second non-consecutive term in the White House, the specter of his daughter's legal peril hangs over every policy decision. Critics argue that the administration's recent aggressive posturing toward the judiciary and its calls to defund certain Justice Department divisions are directly linked to the pressure campaign to protect the first family. This has created a constitutional crisis in slow motion, where the separation of powers is being tested not by abstract philosophy, but by the very real desire of a president to shield his offspring from the consequences of actions taken during his first term. Inside the federal courthouse in Manhattan, the procedural wheels are turning with a grim efficiency that belies the high drama outside. Attorneys for Ivanka Trump have filed urgent motions to challenge the travel restrictions, arguing that they impede her ability to earn a living and participate in legitimate global business ventures. The prosecution, however, is expected to counter with evidence that those very business ventures are intertwined with the individuals and entities named in the sealed evidence. The legal teams are now locked in a discovery battle, fighting over what documents must be turned over and who will be compelled to testify next, with speculation mounting that Jared Kushner may soon find himself in the crosshairs. For the global community watching these events unfold, the image of American democracy is undergoing another stress test. Allies and adversaries alike are observing how the United States handles the prosecution of a former president's daughter. Will the rule of law hold firm, demonstrating that no individual, regardless of their proximity to power, is above accountability? Or will the political pressure exerted by a sitting president succeed in bending the justice system, confirming the worst suspicions of those who view America's institutions as inherently corrupt? The outcome of this case will send a signal far beyond the borders of the Southern District of New York. The concept of the hostage or the bargaining chip has surfaced repeatedly in the commentary surrounding Ivanka's predicament. In the murky world of intelligence and counterintelligence, family members are often the most effective leverage. The unverified claims in the Epstein files regarding Ivanka's role as a form of surety in a complex web of influence have, whether true or not, colored the prosecution's theory of the case. If investigators believe that the family's finances are entangled with interests that would do them harm, then restricting Ivanka's movement is not just about ensuring her appearance at trial, but about disrupting a potential pipeline of influence or coercion that could be activated on foreign soil. Meanwhile, the lifestyle of the Trump children has come under renewed scrutiny. The proposed resort in Albania, envisioned as a sanctuary for the ultra-wealthy, now looks less like a sound investment and more like a potential liability. The local residents of Zvernik, who have been fighting for decades to retain their ancestral lands, watch the legal drama in America with a mixture of bewilderment and hope. They hope that the legal troubles engulfing the Trump family might derail a project that threatens to displace them, proving that justice in some form can sometimes trickle down to the most marginalized. For them, the shocking evidence in America is a distant echo of the shocking indifference they feel from a powerful family willing to build its dreams on disputed land. As the days tick by and the 21-day deadline for compliance with various subpoenas approaches, the pressure on Ivanka Trump is reaching a breaking point. The GPS monitor, which she is reportedly required to wear, serves as a constant, humiliating reminder of her loss of autonomy. It beeps with every movement, a digital tether connecting her to the justice system she once navigated with impunity. Friends say she has retreated from social life, rarely leaving her Miami home, where the windows that once offered a view of endless possibility now feel like the walls of a gilded cage. The psychological impact of such a fall from grace from the West Wing to federal monitoring is a story in itself. The former president's legal team is reportedly exploring a range of extraordinary remedies. Discussions have included the possibility of a presidential pardon, though the legal complexities of pardoning someone for potential state crimes, as opposed to federal ones, are significant. They are also considering a public relations blitz, featuring televised interviews with family members designed to portray Ivanka as a victim of prosecutorial overreach. This strategy carries immense risk, as any public statements made by Ivanka could be used against her in court, potentially contradicting her sealed testimony and exposing her to charges of perjury. In the background, the intelligence community is conducting its own quiet review. The allegations regarding foreign influence stemming from the Epstein document dump have triggered mandatory briefings for congressional leadership. While the specific findings remain classified, leaks suggest that the concern is not limited to past behavior, but extends to current vulnerabilities. If Ivanka Trump is indeed compromised, as the unverified memo suggests, then her access to sensitive information, even as a private citizen, poses a continuing national security risk. This intelligence angle transforms the case from a simple financial fraud investigation into a potential espionage concern, justifying the highest levels of federal intervention. The media, for its part, is struggling to keep pace with the velocity of events. Newsrooms are divided between the factual reporting of court filings and the sensationalism of the unverified Epstein claims. Responsible outlets have refrained from repeating the most salacious details regarding the hostage theory, but the very existence of such theories in official documents has poisoned the well of public discourse. For every viewer who sees Ivanka as a victim of a politicized justice system, another sees her as a privileged elite finally facing consequences, her fall from grace a form of long overdue comeuppance. As we look to the immediate future, the legal calendar is unforgiving. In the coming weeks, Ivanka must either comply with the strictures of her bond or face the revocation of her release. Her legal team will likely file motions to suppress the shocking evidence, arguing it was obtained through questionable means. The judge, however, has already demonstrated a willingness to move fast, and these motions may be denied with equal speed. If they are, the prospect of a trial looms, a trial in which the star witness could very well be Donald Trump, called to testify against the interests of his own daughter to preserve his own legacy. The broader impact on the Trump political dynasty cannot be overstated. Ivanka was always seen as the future, the polished bridge between the brash Trump brand and the moderate, business-friendly wing of the Republican Party. With her now effectively grounded and facing potential prison time, that future evaporates. The Trump political operation must now pivot, relying on the more pugilistic styles of her brothers, who lack her crossover appeal. The family's political evolution, carefully curated over a decade, has been arrested by the swift action of a single federal judge. For the international audience, particularly in Europe and the Middle East, where the Trump Organization has extensive business interests, the message is clear. Doing business with this family now carries an unprecedented legal risk. Partners who were once eager to attach themselves to the Trump name are reportedly reviewing their contracts and exploring exit strategies. The brand that Donald Trump spent a lifetime building and that Ivanka worked to modernize is now toxic in the boardrooms of London, Dubai, and beyond. The financial consequences of this legal case may ultimately dwarf the legal penalties themselves. In the final analysis, the image of Ivanka Trump surrendering her passport is more than a legal formality. It is a metaphor for the entrapment of an entire family within the consequences of its own ambition. The evidence, whatever it contains, has acted as a key, turning the lock on a door that she likely never imagined would close. As she sits in Miami, watching the ocean from her window, she represents the collision of two Americas, one of untouchable wealth and power, and another of immutable justice that, however slowly, grinds forward. The coming months will determine whether that grinding leads to a conviction or to a pardon, but the damage to the myth of the Trump family's invincibility is already complete. The judge's decision to move fast has ensured that this story will not fade away into the endless cycle of political scandal and forgetting. It has created a ticking clock, a deadline by which the Trump family must either prove their innocence or face the music. For Ivanka, the ultimate question is no longer about her business empire or her political future. It is about whether she will ever again be free to board a plane and leave American soil. The answer to that question lies in the files of federal prosecutors, in the testimony of those who once stood by her side, and in the hands of a father who has always promised to fight, but who may not have the power to win this particular war.